Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Thomas Fisher here of Galway Technology Centre, and this is the second in a series of wellness webinars that we at Galway Technology Centre have been hosting this for our community. Today, we are joined by Paddy McHugh. He is the CEO of Compliplus, a health and safety consultancy firm. Paddy has been working as a safety consultant for over 20 years with experience in multinational organizations and SMEs across Ireland, the UK, Europe, and the US. He has a Master's in Science from Leicester University. He's a certified ROSPA safety inspector and has several other safety qualifications. In terms of his experience, Paddy has most recently been contracted by the HSA to develop a safety management program for the Department of Education. And as we would all agree, that would test anyone's abilities in this current climate. As CEO of Compliplus, Paddy oversees a team dedicated to assisting organizations with safety management using both traditional and online solutions. Now, nearly a year into the pandemic, we might all think that we have become pros at working remotely, but there is always something to learn. Paddy will cover some of the best practices that have evolved over the last year, along with some of the legislation behind it. And in doing so, we will hopefully have some useful takeaways. Any questions that do arise, please pop them into the Q&A box, and we'll be sure that we respond to them at the end. Now, I would like to hand you over to Paddy.
Hello and welcome to this short webinar. I'd like to thank Thomas and Lauren for inviting me to participate in this with yourselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to just, first of all, share the presentation with you, and I'm going to go through this presentation in a relatively, I suppose, quick basis, getting an overview of the requirements. Again, we're from Compliplus, and we pride ourselves as offering a partnership approach to safety management for clients. So in terms of this is part of our legislative guidance series, and it's on working from home, which now becomes significant given COVID. It was in place prior to COVID, obviously, where people used to have different arrangements for people working at home, either full-time, part-time, ad hoc, or as the need arises. So we're going to look at, first of all, the legislative requirements, and then I'm going to take you through the compliance process and best ways of achieving compliance and the things that have to be done with regard to compliance. So the legislation is covered under the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work General Application Regulations, which is from 2007 to 2020. And the specific legislation is Chapter 5 of Part 2, which is display screen equipment. And if we start with I suppose, the tough bit, which is the legislative bit, and we get that out of the way very quickly, but it's very important to get an understanding of what the requirements are. So employers are required to evaluate health and safety of workstations with particular reference to eyesight, physical difficulties, and mental stress. Appropriate steps must be taken to control any risks identified. The employer needs to carry out an analysis of individual workstations, and this should be done by a competent person with the necessary skills, training, and experience to complete that analysis. It is not sufficient in the Irish jurisdiction. It is in other jurisdictions, but not in Ireland, to allow employees to use a software package to assess their own workstations. It has to be done by a competent person and not themselves. The employer must be actively engaged in completing a physical check assessment analysis of the individual workstation. So that's something that has to be done. Now, that's done in the workplace, but where is the workplace? Well, the workplace in this case is home. So it has to be done at home as well. Employers must ensure that health surveillance is in place, and health surveillance in this regard would be eyesight and I suppose stress and mental well-being because of factors that are associated with remote working, which I will go through for you. There is two very, very good guidance documents to assist organizations with understanding their requirements. And the first guidance document is from Chapter 5 of the General Application Regulations, which is specifically for display screen equipment. And we've given a link there, and again, we can forward it on or make it available to people as required. And it is available on the Health and Safety Authority website as well. The second very important document, and very appropriate, is guidance on working from home for employers and employees. Now, this is a recent document, so it takes account of current situations, not necessarily COVID, but current situations. Now, there is I suppose, a header legislation called the 2005 Act, and that overrides all safety. And what it says about workplaces is the employer must provide a safe workplace, a safe system of work, a safe equipment where workers are not exposed to hazards associated with the use of a workstation. And if we look here, we've got a workstation set up, and unfortunately it isn't set up in a safe manner. So it's not necessarily a safe workplace for the individual there, because working prolonged in that, at that workstation means that the individual could have issues with ergonomics, and that means their body posture in relation to their work environment isn't satisfactory. And it can lead to what we call a cumulative injury. That's an injury or issues that occur over time. So it's not doing it just for an hour or 2 hours. It's doing something repetitive over time, and that repetitiveness and time adds to accumulation of issues, or potential accumulation of issues. Evaluate risks associated with the use of workstation and ensure that appropriate safety controls are in place. So this was basically assessing the risk and putting effective controls in place, and provide appropriate information, instruction, training, and supervision to workers who use workstations so they can work in a safe manner. So for the home working, that kind of says, well, how do we do that? How do we supervise? How do we ensure that their workplace is safe, etc.? Again, there are some tools and guidance on how to do that, which we will go through later in this presentation. So one of the fundamental parts is we must be able to recognize what good setup is. And it's not just for managers to know or owners to know, but everybody should know, employees should know. So a good setup, and we can see here we've got a reasonable chair, a good sitting posture. Some people prefer to sit with the back of the chair right up beside them. Some people like to sit up independent of the back. It is a personal choice. But the chair has to be appropriate, which I'll explain in a couple of minutes. The laptop has a riser that rises it up to a level that's appropriate for the individual. They have a wireless keypad and a mouse, and that setup is quite good. They also have a blackout blind to prevent any glare as required, and it can be adjusted up or down, and that's a kitchen table. That's working at home. And very good ergonomic position, fully compliant. But again, it isn't always easy as that. You know, sometimes this is the reality. The kitchen chair, the kitchen table, and the laptop on the table, and we're in there working away. And you can already see the glare. Now, that's up to the person to move the blind up or down. But the person is working in a totally unsuitable position, which over time is going to cause problems for them. So that's incorrect. So correct setup. Again, before we run through the fundamentals of the requirements, we're going to just look at the correct setup. So very quickly, head upright and eyes level with top of screen. So your eyes are level with top of screen. So it's very straightforward. Shoulders are relaxed and arms in neutral position. So shoulders should be relaxed and arms should be in neutral position so people are fully relaxed. Backrest is positioned upright to afford support if required. Hands are supported by armrests, so armrests are there. Now the whole idea is they're for rest purposes. Yeah, ideally you shouldn't be resting your hands on the table. Your hands should be in a neutral position and slightly above the table in neutral position. Seat offers lower back support, so there's lumbar support in the seat, which is important. Seat offers adequate padding for personal comfort and is slightly tilted forward, so it kind of forces you to come back, which forces your body to go up straight. 2-inch clearance between the back of the knees and the chair, and that's very important that there's a gap there between the back of your legs and the chair. Again, it makes blood circulation and other issues. And feet resting flat on the floor or on a pedestal or a footstool. And the idea there is that provides support to your legs, and your legs are not fully, especially the thigh part of your legs, are not fully resting on the chair, because that can compromise vascular blood vessels, particularly veins. And, you know, it can be associated with varicose veins or other complications of the vascular system because of poor sitting. Space under the desk is clear again, so people don't trip or or fall over or whatever. There's adequate space and enough to be able to move around or twist, turn it on the chair as required. And all accessories are used correctly. So, the idea of having a wireless mouse is it can be right beside you. There's no reaching or stretching or whatever the case may be. So that's a very, very simple, straightforward guide to corrective setup. So employee, again, what's an employee? Employee is an employee who habitually uses display screen equipment as a significant part of his or her normal work. And the definition of habitual is 1 hour or more during the working day. So who falls under this legislation? An employee who works 1 hour or more in front of a computer on a given day. They are subject to the requirements of this legislation. A workstation means an assembly comprising display screen equipment which may be provided with a keyboard or input device or software or a contribution of the foregoing determining the operator and machine interface and includes a work chair, work desk or work surface, any optional extras or peripherals, so could be a headset, the immediate work environment of the display screen equipment. So what's the work environment around them like? Because that it can impact them. So what is the minimum requirements for display screen equipment? Well, again, we have this picture which kind of shows a fair amount of them. So we got display screen. Here we're using twin screens. And the idea is that the top of both screens is level with the eye where possible. So we have a riser for the PC, for the laptop, and we have a separate riser for the screen. And it is adjustable. Both of those are adjustable up and down to suit the individual user. Then you've got your keyboard. Yeah, and your workstation, work desk, surface. So adequate space, etc. Yeah, the chair. You can see the chair is a typical office chair. They don't have to be too overly expensive. €70 gets you a very, very good chair. People can pay over thousands for them, but really, 70 to 80 euro gets you a reasonable chair. The environment, we're talking about light, heat, ventilation, glare, noise, dust, distraction. There are all issues associated with the environment. And the employee computer interface. For most remote workers, the big issue is access to broadband and access to appropriate broadband to enable you to do the work that you have to do, which again can be problematic. Responsibility for health and safety at work rests with the employer, whether or not that work has been done at the employee's home. So the employer is ultimately responsible. This is a bedroom setup. So we have a desk, not massive, but it's a desk, and it's appropriate. We've got the computer set up with a riser. We have the keyboard and mouse, and the individual can work there safely. Yeah. Now we're going to talk about the arrangements in rooms, etc., briefly as well. But sometimes people have very limited rooms, so you have to work with what you have. And the employer has to be careful that they consult with the employee over what is required and what space they have, etc. And the employer can't necessarily force, a desk and chair on them because they may not necessarily have the room for that, and that could cause an additional problem. Employers need to consult with their employees to assure themselves that the employer is aware of any specific risks regarding working from home, the work activity and the workplaces are suitable. So what we're asking you to do from home and how and where you're going to do it is suitable. They provide suitable equipment to enable the work to be done. So if the person needs a laptop to do the work, it's up to the company to provide that laptop for them. Obviously, you can put rules on the use of the laptop, etc., 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 but you can't expect the employee to provide that. Now, in fairness, sometimes an employee might have a laptop and say, don't bother, we do it, and that's fine, 100%. But there are some occasions when there may be access to specific software or other issues or security issues, and a laptop would have to provide it. And it's the same with all equipment. Whatever the equipment is required, the employer has to provide. But in a lot of cases, the employee might have, they might have the chair, they might have the desk, they might have the laptop because they have that from work anyway. They need an additional wireless mouse and a keyboard, and they need a riser. And actually, what would be great? Another screen, because that helps with productivity. It helps me get to my day. And that's the negotiation that takes part in terms of, well, what have you, what do you need, and we figure out what should be put in place. There's a pre-arranged means of contact. They're not just left there nobody contacts, you know, there has to be some form of communication. And we're going to go through best practice with regard to what should be in place. I think it's very straightforward, not overly complicated. Specific considerations. Space. Have someone got enough space? Isolation. One of my employees, awful difficult, because 3 young kids under 5 in the house. 3 young kids under 5 and trying to get work done. Very difficult, extremely difficult. So, you know, can you isolate yourself to get the work done, or are you going to be stuck in the middle of everything? Security. Are the security implications about, you know, what you're storing or the documentation that you might have or information that you might have? You know, what considerations need to be put in place for that? Broadband accessibility, I've mentioned that already. Lighting. So we got what we call open lighting, and then we got task lighting. You know, so for the task they're doing, and is it appropriate? Housekeeping, keeping a tidy area around. Now it's very hard for the employer to manage that, but the employee should be told, listen, it's an office environment, you have to keep things neat and tidy, etc. And there are reasons for that, and I'll show you in a second, you know, where things can go awry and the problems it could cause. Temperature. Temperature in office environment, sedentary work is 17.5 degrees minimum within 1 hour starting work. So the person, the house that the person is working in should have a reasonable temperature. That may come up with an issue. Well, listen, they don't have the heat on during the day, etc. It's going to incur a cost, etc. Again, that's something that you would have to negotiate or work out through with the particular employee. So, electrical safety. Yeah, you know, even offices tend to be poor with electrical safety in terms of office environments where there's multi-sockets, multi-plugs and different things. And really, we don't want to be causing a hazard in their home if we're asking an employee to work from home. So we should ensure that they have everything that is needed. And it might be a case that we give them something with surge protection, like a multi-adapter with surge protection to reduce the risk of that. Fire, obviously we don't be adding the risks with regard to fire, so paper, documents, etc. And obviously you need to be aware that, you know, they could be by themselves, so they've got to be careful during the day, and hopefully a fire should go. Again, if they're doing just normal activities, the risk of a fire is very low. It's the same as a house normally would be, but we have to take care of. So it's very hard to get a picture that takes everything into account, but this one goes a good way towards it. Space, significant issues. Yeah, can't talk about isolation. Security, well, it can't talk about security, can't talk about broadband access, can't talk about lighting. There's significant glare in that window. You know, even with the camera, you can tell that the glare is quite, so that could be difficult. Housekeeping, we don't need to talk too much about that. You can see what it's like. Temperature, not sure. Electrical safety, look onto the desk. It is a myriad of issues, and again, a high risk. And of course, all the boxes, paper, etc., etc., etc. So, you know, we have to make sure that the person has the capabilities to work from home in terms of space, etc. But also their personal abilities. Are they neat, tidy, etc. Or are they likely to create a mess? Because they create a mess at work, they're going to create a mess at home. You know, and again, we have to, I suppose, make sure that they're not adding risk to their work environment at home. So one of the ways to address this is look at a home working policy. And, you know, this isn't a safety document. This is a basic document which outlines what the arrangements are with regard to work. It should set out the criteria and requirements for when employees work from home. And it can include information on the arrangements put in place by the employer to assess risk. Yeah, so effectively, the employer should be assessing risk. Now, the way that's done, so you get either internally you have someone trained in workstation assessment, or you get someone external. And currently with COVID, the way it's done is virtually using Zoom or something similar, or FaceTime, and we would ask them to go around the room with a camera, etc. Now, obviously, we've got GDPR issues, personal information issues, etc. Obviously, there has to be an understanding that the information is for safety purposes, so it's a legal and valid reason for doing this. And again, the person, if they have concerns, they should cover anything that they don't want us to see while, or the person to see while that is being done. The whole idea is the employer is getting a view to make sure that everything is in place Responsibilities of employees to report risks and work-related accidents to the employer. So the employer has still a responsibility to report risks or concerns or issues or accidents. Now, you know, there's lots of talk about legal issues if an accident occurs, etc. Well, you know, at the end of the day, you do everything you can to prevent accidents, and if something happens, we've got to deal with that accident, and it falls where it falls from a legal standpoint. You know, we can't preempt or predict, you know, which way what goes, because there's so many variables, etc., etc., etc. But what we do is, as an organization or as an employer, we try to minimize the risk of something happening by putting effective controls in place, and we hope that that will help with the reduction or mitigation of risk. Clearly detailing the scope of work being undertaken, so you know what the work is and what shouldn't be done. You know, so this is what we expect you to do when you're at home: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We don't want you engaging in the following: C, D, E, F, G. If there are exclusions that you want to include. The workstation arrangements, make sure the workstation has been set up correctly, and it can be set up as best as it can given the circumstance. The provision and use of work equipment. So what equipment are we going to provide and how should it be used? So again, that goes with the training on the ergonomics and also on the assessment of setting up the workstation correctly. Means of communication. So phone, Zoom, Teams, etc. And that later on I'll talk about Teams and or Zoom and how important that is. And there's lots of other issues. And of course we know you can't stipulate, you know, that you have to be in reasonable attire, as our friend is at the front of that picture. You know, top half is perfect, bottom half isn't. And we do know that there's interference from kids, etc., noise and animals and everything else that occurs. So again, you know, if there's a professional presentation or meeting, you should ensure that that's managed effectively. And when there's maybe a bit more of a social type meeting within the organization, yes, family and that can mingle in, etc., if that's deemed appropriate. Employees must identify a suitable space within their home from home working. Employees must identify what equipment resources employers need to work from home and agree these with the employee. So again, as I said earlier, we have to agree what's needed. And it could be a combination of, well, have a desk, I have a chair, we're going to give you a better chair. No, I really don't have space for a better chair, I'm just going to keep this chair. And if that's the case, that's the case, you know. So some people are restricted by space. So desk, computer, keyboard, mouse, computer riser, office chair, footstool, blackout blind. Yeah. We have a blind, but it's the glare is still coming through. So, you know, a blackout blind. So again, question, is that the employer's responsibility? Actually, yes, it is, if we want to make the workplace a safe workplace for the individual. And there's lots of other complications that could arise with regard to requirements given the type of work people might be engaged in. Awareness of work-related stress. So home working may lead to reduced or no social interaction with fellow workers or customers. This lack of social engagement can weigh heavily on people for whom a social connection is an important element of work. There are people where work is their social engagement. And this remote working, because of COVID, has actually taken that away. There's a lot of us who are just looking for some level of engagement because we're stuck and we can't get out because of the COVID restrictions. This isolating consequence of home working should not be ignored, as it can lead to depression and other mental health issues. So longer working hours may occur because of home working, as the boundary between what is work and what is not work at home is not necessarily fixed or in place. There may be potential for a reduced work-life balance or a limited demarcation between work and home life. And again, trying to do the work and the kids hanging out of you, it is very, very difficult and it is stressful. And what that means is that we tend to wait for the kids to go to bed to get that extra bit of work done or to catch up with something. That elongates the day and doesn't give you a rest time. And we're into this spiral of what we call pressure that induces stress. So options for reducing work-related stress, and I know you're some of the webinars in this series that you're doing is going to be looking at mental well-being, and again, we're just not going to go into it in huge detail, but common sense approach. You know, the work-life balance. So we're looking at define boundaries. You know, what you do, what you don't do, when you're working, when you're not working. Define roles, what your work is, what your work isn't. Structure the day. So as in the workplace, structure the day. We'll start at 9. I'm having a break at 11 o'clock for 15 minutes. I'm stopping at 1 o'clock. I'm back at 1:45. And then structure your day and take your breaks. Keep separation between work and home. And my office is next door to my house. My computer does not go into the office, go into the house. Yeah. If I want my computer, I've got to walk out of the house into my office, use the computer, and then back into the house. It's separate. We keep them separate. Otherwise, it'll be just an extension of my body, and it will be with me all the time. So I have to keep it separate because I know the tendency is I pick it up and use it. So home office, computer, bits and pieces. If you can lock the door, time out. I start back at 9 o'clock in the morning. Discuss workload issues. Again, if you feel that, and it may be because of your work situation at home, the interference with kids, etc. Say, listen, yeah, I am trying, but I'm not managing to get all I used to be able to do at work because of this. And you go back to the supervisor and say, listen, I'm sorry, but can you reduce the workload, or can we spread this, or can we change the deadlines, etc. So the employer has a duty to, I suppose, respect that within reason and work through it, obviously. Maintain work social interaction. Keep, if you're involved with colleagues, keep involved with colleagues. Arrange a meeting once a week on Zoom or Teams, or have it as a social catch up, or a progress support, or whatever the case may be. But you need to maintain social interaction. Get out of the house. Obviously, there's restrictions with COVID, and depending when you're watching this, the restrictions may still be here or a distant memory. But we have to get out of the house, get some fresh air. Build exercise into your day, be it a walk or whatever the case may be. Obviously, being conscious of the COVID requirements that are in place. Plan restful, passive activities to de-stress or have some me time, and switch off. So again, we're not going big into mindfulness or managing stress, but these are simple things to help you manage stress. So again, in summary, this is a legislative requirement. So the law is there whether the person works from home or whether the person works in an office. We have to do a workstation assessment, be it at home or in the office. And again, competent person, either internally or externally, would do that for you. Health surveillance, so there is a requirement for eye tests. There is a requirement for, assuring, making sure people are not overly stressed, etc. So there is a requirement for that. And that's not necessarily a formal, but it can be done informally, one would hope. A remote working policy helps guide and clarify roles, responsibilities, etc. And it's a go-to document if there are concerns or issues. And again, these documents tend to be live documents, so we keep adding or improving to them as we find out more information. Suitability of arrangement. So it's an arrangement between the employer and the employee where there has to be some level of cooperation over, setting up the arrangements and agreeing what is required and agreeing the work and all that. So it's I suppose it's making sure all that is in place. Staff training and awareness. You can make them aware of the importance of good ergonomics when at their desk, and the bits I mentioned there about work-life balance. You shouldn't be longer than 45 minutes, 50 minutes in front of the screen. You should be getting up, photocopier or making a coffee or whatever, and then sitting back down and off again. Again, simple things. Stress management, again, work-life balance. Communication, good communication between the home worker and their supervisor. Really good communication so people know exactly what's what and how they are and any issues that are dealt with, etc. And also then communication within your work colleagues and outside of that to make sure that there's good social interaction. And the whole idea is to have a reasonably work-life balance. We have some employees who do not want to come back into the workplace. They're happy at home and they'll never want to come back. Unfortunately, that won't be a possibility for everybody. But for some people, it actually works very, very well. For others, I have one, as I said in particular, they can't wait. They can't wait to get back for their sanity, as they keep saying, because the kids are just making it very difficult for them. Not the work environment in terms of how they're set up, etc. It's just the kids. Okay, so that's it from me. And now we're going to go to a Q&A session. But just for information, we have upcoming courses in March, a QQI Level 6 in Safety Management, which is webinar-based, and that starts on 30th of March, and a Workstation Assessors course, which is again webinar-based, it's one day, is the 24th of March. So back to Thomas now for any Q&A that he has for us.
Perfect, thank you, Paddy. We'll just give it a minute or two just to see if any more questions come in. Thank you very much, a very informative talk. I jotted down loads of notes myself even. I think, you know, talking about workspaces, I think you brought up a lot of very important things. I think the workspace at home, we're all very aware of the kind of main things like broadband issues and, you know, kind of software issues or even the hardware, but we don't think of housekeeping. We don't think of the temperature of our space and all this. And these are all things that are factors that, you know, especially coming after a few cold weeks there, you know, we have to be very aware of those things to keep that up to snuff, and to understand that employers also have a bit of an obligation to ensure that employees have that within their home spaces is interesting enough. Just one question coming in here from one of the attendees asking, could you go through the position of your legs when sitting at the desk once more, maybe just to kind of explain that a little bit more?
Okay, so we can just go back to this for you now. Okay, so the problem with sitting on a chair is that your body weight, a lot of your body weight is on your rear end, for want of a better word, and then the rest of it is on your thighs, or in fact the back of your thighs when you're sitting. And the vascular system, which is the blood vessel system comprising of arteries and veins. So the arteries are deep in muscle, you know, so they're not close to the surface. So therefore, when there's pressure on them, it's unlikely that you're going to damage them. However, the veins, which take blood back to the heart, they are very close to the surface, and therefore, if there's pressure on your legs, excessive pressure, and over time, it can cumulatively damage those. I haven't time to go into the way it damages, but there's a way of explaining it, and we don't have time to. But what we can say is that if someone is sitting correctly at a desk, and if the person is there, and you're sitting down, and your feet are solid on the ground, and then you put your hands between the seat and your thigh, and can it go in freely near the end of the chair? If it can't, then you're not supporting your legs sufficiently, and there is a risk that you could damage your vascular system, i.e. the veins, to a point that could cause other issues. And a common issue would be classed as varicose veins. Yeah, and that occurs because of a failure of the blood to continually progress out because the process for stopping the blood returning is damaged of the valve process. So that's what happens there. Another bad example would be crossing your legs or bring your legs back under the desk, under the chair. They're all not very good because they tend to put pressure on the vascular system. And the last one there is the gap between the back of your leg, you know, below the knee, and the chair. Again, so that's sufficient room there, because again, that area is a sensitive area in terms of pressure. And what we're talking about here is a cumulative injury over time. It's not doing it once or twice, it's doing it hundreds, thousands of times over a number of years. And a cumulative injury, it happens over time. And the other thing about cumulative injuries is it's not necessarily going to happen the same way to everybody. And in fact, some people could sit incorrectly and never have a problem, whereas another person could do it for a short time and have a problem. It's about hereditary, it's about the genetics, etc. So there's lots of factors. And the whole way our, I suppose, process and the way legislation is designed is to try to put steps in place to prevent that from occurring, irrespective of your potential for having an adverse effect as a result of it. If we prevent you from putting yourself in a position where you're going to expose yourself to that risk, then you're mitigating against that risk into the future.
Very good. Thank you, Paddy. Another question that came in from an attendee has less on the physical side of things, but more on the kind of maybe the mental wellness and kind of the motivation factor. And obviously we're going into a year of the kind of roller coaster of lockdowns, and they're wondering if there's any suggestions to keep staff busy or motivated while working from home. One staff member they mentioned is doesn't appear to be doing a huge amount of work, even though KPIs are set. What any kind of good pointers on that front? I know it's a tough one.
That's not a health and safety issue. that's a performance management issue. And I know I can only give examples from our own experience. We have used different processes for not for what we call enforcing productivity or overly monitoring productivity, but we've set out, on a weekly basis, well, this is what's required, and we do a lot more planning of the week ahead with regard to work, and a lot more individual planning. So talking with an individual, saying, okay, and what's planned for today and next week and during the week, and we write them down and say, okay, so that should be ready by Wednesday afternoon, and we try to set that in place. So rather than what we call a formal measurement, we tend to go make it more personalized because people need the social interaction. So supervisors would spend more time, and we would spend ourselves more time discussing with each of our employees what they're doing for the week and issues, and then maybe catching up with them once or twice during the week as well, just to see where things are, etc. And it doesn't guarantee, that everybody will put in 100%. We're realists. We know that, people might be on Facebook or might be doing this, and that's life. That's reality. But what we have is we've got expectations of output that we require from them. And if they're doing that, well, then at this stage, we're quite happy. But, we do it in a way that's not, I suppose, using the big hand, watching. We don't think that works. And again, where we involve people and groups as well, where other people depend on others to provide part of work, that tends to bring people in as well. So I know there are negatives and I know there are issues, but then it's down to a behavioral issue of an individual, and you have some who just abuse the system. And again, that would be a HR issue in terms of how you manage that.
Very good, Paddy. I think you did a very good job there of kind of balancing the HR issue as opposed to a health and safety issue. But what I found interesting there, in the way I see it, is that there is an overlap. If you have the proper health and safety procedures in play, and I think one thing that I've taken from your talk, Paddy, is the communication and procedures in place for employers and employees to keep that communication line open even throughout the week, which is going to be more than maybe they would normally do when everyone's in office, where you can oversee things more readily. If you keep that communication in place, you're keeping an eye on, motivation and keeping those factors going, but you're also adding to the social interaction as well. Even though it's in a work environment, you're kind of hitting a few elements all in one. So it's a very nuanced kind of balancing act. But I think, as you say, it's not necessarily a direct health and safety issue, but I think there is definitely an overlap. But
right.
So thank you very much, Paddy. I think there's no more other questions coming in, and I think you've hit a lot of good points that people can have any takeaways. Paddy, if anyone after this would like to reach out to you for any further information, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
That's no problem. They can contact me via email, paddy@compliplus.com, or via our website. Absolutely no problem. We always say advice is free. It's implementing it costs money. Again, we provide advice on an ongoing basis, and again we have some good checklists with regard to home working. And what we tend to advise is that if someone's working from home, we give them a checklist. Say, listen, fill out that checklist, and then let's discuss the issues that you have, etc. And we try then to come to an agreement with them over whether a desk or a chair or a computer or a riser or whatever is required. And I know, it may come as a cost. I suppose we're looking at light at the end of a tunnel now with regard to the vaccines, etc. So we are coming out the end of a tunnel. Having said that, it still is a number of months away before we will get people back into the workplace. I mean, I have some very large corporate clients, and they are not coming back into the workplace till January at the earliest of next year. You know, that's they've made that decision, and that's it. So we have to now just make sure that if someone's working from, that they're set up correctly. You know, and once they're set up correctly, it could be for months, it could be for whatever, but when they're set up correctly, at least it provides them with a very good work environment. And that helps with productivity, it helps with quality, it helps with them feeling that they're valued as well. You know, I had a query during the week where somebody, the employer was saying, well, the employee should buy the computer. And I said, well, no, the employee should, if you want the employee to work from home and they need a computer to work from home, and they don't have a computer, then you must provide a computer for them. Now, you can put restrictions over that computer as in what they can do and what they can't do, and that's fine. But you must ultimately provide that computer, and not just the computer, but the computer then must be set up correctly for them.
Very good. Well, thank you. And yeah, it's great that you have that resource there. So anybody who does want to reach out to Paddy, please do. As he said there, unfortunately, we're going to be looking at this for a few more months going forward. Remote working is here. And to that degree, you know, as Paddy mentioned, there are going to be a lot of people who want to continue this even after the workspaces do open. So putting those processes in place for employers could be a more longer term. And I know legislation is being put in place to kind of have remote working as an option going forward, and how employees can actually request this and keep this as a reality. So the blended environment is something here to stay. But Paddy, thank you again for all your information there. Thank you for all the attendees for joining us today. Stay tuned. We will have more webinars coming up, so stay tuned to the Galway Technology Center social media. Oh, go on, Paddy.
Yeah, Dervla, yes, you're correct.
He's coming to us all the way from Achill.
Yeah, it is Achill Island. That's where I'm from. So I always like promoting the West, even though I'm stuck in Cavan and I've frozen there. So
very good, very good. Well,
okay.
Thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we will see you hopefully soon in the near future.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.